So this session is MTSS and students with significant disabilities, and we're going to be hitting kind of two big punchlines. One punchline is around very specific to thinking about and supporting individuals with significant disability labels. And the other strand and punchline is around, so what does that tell us for how to design MTSS in a way that has them in mind from the get-go, so we're not retrofitting? Like, well, we threw an all students line out to here, but it did include those kids, because they've historically been other places. So if they were in this place, what would MTSS need to look like? The handouts that you have, the materials that you have on your thumb drive are everything you will need for this session. So there are a couple that you'll probably want to have queued up earlier rather than later. And so this would be what's in your folder. No, that's a different folder. But it's a good set of resources, just a different workshop. Here we go. There we go. So this is what your folder should look like. It should have in it John and Rob, domains and features, Swift via, MTSS, sample practice profile, MTSS design considerations for historically marginalized and underperforming populations, which we then abbreviate. Resources for getting started with MTSS, membership participation indicators, and a screener for membership participation. And I'm going to just keep repeatedly referencing and having you kind of start to use and think about those frames throughout this session. I'm going to start you off with just a little bit of data, a little bit of why, and I'm guessing most of you already know the why, so I'm going to do that really quickly, and then we're going to move into student stories. So this is mostly going to be like, so here's a kiddo, and here's what happened, and here's where it fits for MTSS. How many of you have already been in sessions with me at some point? So you've probably seen this slide before. This is a slide that indicates where I'm from. I'm from Rochester, New Hampshire, originally born and raised there. And my town got a little bit of a rep in terms of the world of severe disabilities early on when we were all trying to figure out how to implement Public Law 94-142. And my school district, Rochester, New Hampshire School District, got this student into their system in the mid-'80s. His name was Timmy W. And they felt like Timmy W. was too severely disabled to benefit from being in a public school to receive special education. So not included, just like physically getting into the building to have separate special education, they felt like he couldn't benefit from that. And their argument was some kids just don't show the eligibility for or the capacity to benefit from special education. And it set up a big kind of case law precedence in our field, where the courts came back and they were like, no, kids don't have to demonstrate capacity to benefit from your instruction. You've got to try the instruction and then try other things, was really the punchline. So for me, that meant that I didn't know people with significant disabilities until I got to college. And when I first met my first person with a significant disabilities, Bob Williams, in a class that was my intro to exceptionality, he really blew me away because he was like communicating about disability policy and communicating in full sentences. And he had this whole professional life. And I never had that in my head when it came to people with big labels. I just didn't have my head around that. And so I really kind of made it the thrust of my professional work early on in my career. And it was supporting kids with significant disability labels that moved me into caring about school-wide PBIS, school-wide RTI models, and then into MTSS models. So I thank Bob and others for their patience with me as I got my head around what does it mean to have that label in life, and what do you need things to be like in order to be productive and live a enviable life. Nationally, for the last couple of decades, kids with the biggest labels, kids with low incidence disabilities, have not been spending the majority of their time in general education settings. This is not news to you. You knew it coming into this conference. You heard it from Dan. You heard it from Paula. You probably heard it in other sessions. My colleagues in Kansas, Mary Morningstar, Jenny Kurth, have been taking a look at the historical data to kind of learn from it. And what they're seeing, if this line were a line that says you have a 50-50 chance of spending 80% or more of your day in general ed settings, all the kids below the line, this is what's happening for kids with low incidence disabilities, kids with more significant support needs. And what it shows is they still don't even have a 50-50 chance of being in general ed settings. And the kids with low incidence disabilities, it continues to go up, but you can see the slope is kind of small on the whole here. I'm not going to get into all the weeds of what this slide communicates, but if you're interested, this is part of a recorded webinar that's available on our Swift Education Center website. They took that data and they said, okay, if those are the trends for the last 10 years, and we look at particular subgroups of kids with more significant disability labels, can we project into the future when they will have a 50-50 chance of being in general ed settings? And what you see here is that for kids with autism spectrum disorder labels, if we project based on the current line, the current trend line, by about 2025, they'll have a better than 50-50 chance of being in general ed for the majority of their day. Same for kids who experience a label of being deafblind. For the kids with a label of intellectual disability or multiple disabilities, even at 2025, they still will be below the 50-50 chance line. So we have a choice. We keep doing what we've been doing, we wait till 2025, and then readjust then, or we start doing something new now. And I opt for something new now, obviously, because this is just unacceptable to me. We are finding that the research is really clear. Dan said this very well yesterday morning in his keynote. Right? The evidence is really clear. We get great benefits for kids with significant disability labels when they're educated in general education settings, and they're well supported, not dumped into class. When they're well supported, we see increases in academics, in communication, self-determination, employment skills, right across the line. And quite powerfully, as he stated in his keynote, there is no evidence in the last 40 years documenting positive outcomes, anything close to what we're seeing in this literature, by being educated in separate settings for kids with significant disabilities. So in an era where we say we're concerned about evidence-based practices, this evidence needs to inform not only our direct practices, but our larger organizational structures and systems in education. I know presently in Indiana and in other states in our nation, there are systems on the whole where kids with significant disabilities spend their days in life skills classrooms, spend their days in separate schools, spend their day in regional programs, very separate from their non-disabled peers, at the same time that the literature is not supporting that practice. In part, we continue to do it because it's what we've always done. In part, I think people continue to do it because they don't know what the alternative could look like and what it could bring them. There's a lot of fear and anxiety, like, you want to bring that kid into my class? You want that kid in our school? Like, what would that look like? What could they benefit from? Because they haven't had the experience. It's just like I was in college. I had never met Bob Williams until I met Bob Williams. And then it rocked my world. So I'd like to share with you some stories of kids that I hope will give you some tangible examples to go back with of what's possible. And for the most part, I'm going to be using videos that you can access yourselves online and use for teaching locally. And I've tried to give you the materials you would need in order to use those for teaching purposes. So let's start with some examples. And we're not going to start with Madeline. I want to start off with a really hard one. So in your resources for today, you have a file called The Tale of Two Students. And I would like to bring you into the tale of these two students, John and Rob. And I'd like to start here to make the point because both of these kiddos were in the same exact school system. They were older students. late middle, early high school. And we invited their IEP teams to write down descriptions of each of the students. So these are some descriptors generated by those people who are working to support them daily. So they knew these kids well. John's team described John as frightened of crowds and mainstream environments. Nonverbal. He can't read. He's compulsive about checking his watch. He has an IQ of 42, developmentally disabled and brain injured. He's withdrawn. He's clumsy, and he's a bit overweight. Just to throw that in there for good measure. Rob is described as helpful, a social butterfly, a jokester, a little shy, very responsible, loves football, quite cooperative. He has emergent reading skills, and he has nearly age-appropriate communication skills when he spells on his little spelling board. Okay? 2 quick profiles. Kind of note the salient differences for the 2 kids, John and Rob. Now let's look at their educational programs in the same district. John's educational program, he's in a self-contained class. He's separate from non-disabled peers except for lunch and for art. He gets speech therapy to promote oral communication. Remember, he's nonverbal. His IEP goals currently focus on pre-academic skills, self-care, vocational, and life skills. And actually, the year that they were generating this list for him, one of his big priority goals was learning how to fold sheets and make beds. He spends his day with other students with significant disabilities, and he attends Special Olympics twice a year. Okay, there's the overview of his educational program. Rob's educational program, he's included in 5 mainstream classes, 5 kind of general ed classes. His educational goals are related to the main themes, the main learning objectives within those classes based on the general education curriculum and skills in reading and math and computer. He also is working on some basic life skills within typical routines, like it takes him a little while to put his coat on and off, and they work on that, like when he's going outside or when he's coming in for the day, as an example. Speech therapy for him, because he also has limited communication, provides him with a device for communicating. And remember, he has nearly age-appropriate communication when he's spelling on that device. He's the assistant manager of the football team, and he has a job in the school store. 2 educational programs, same school district. When asked, predict the future for each of these kiddos, this is what the teams came up with. John's team said he'll live in a group home, he'll work in a sheltered workshop, he'll spend time primarily with other people who have disabilities and are paid caregivers, he'll probably watch a lot of TV and go to the mall. Rob's future, he'll live in an apartment with roommates without disabilities, he'll purchase paid supports from community agencies as needed, he'll work in the family business, join a fitness club, and hang out with friends at night and on weekends. 2 very different futures are in mind from these teams. So take a moment, take some notes. Why? Why are these students' educational programs and futures so different? Make a quick list. What do you think's at play? What's making it so different for these 2 kiddos? Come up with 2 or 3 reasons why you think that is. Okay. Why? Why are they so different? What are your thoughts? One's more out in gen ed, and so they see some other possibilities by that experience. Okay. Parent advocacy may be at play here, right? We didn't kind of mention the parents in either profile, but that may be a force at play. Great. Yes, ma'am. Great. So prior instruction, prior environments, prior educational experiences, great. Nice. Yes. Okay, so it just may be the design of the system has set it up this way. Okay, great. Ooh, nice insight. Yes. That's a really nice way of saying some not nice information. One kid looks really disabled, one kid doesn't. Would be another way to say that. Right? One kid has a way to communicate with his peers, one doesn't. Okay, all right? Right, so, because we've seen that dynamic play out, right? The kids who are well behaved, more likely to be included. Kid who doesn't behave that well, less likely to be included. Kid who has the cool backpack and all the recent school supplies, more likely to be accepted by peers. The kid who doesn't have those pretty supports around them, less likely to be accepted by peers. We've seen this dynamic play out before. We can name it, it's okay. It's safe, we're just recording, it's fine. Anything else that strikes you? Okay. So it could be linked back to just the practices and skills of the team members. One team hasn't had kind of updated training and support, so they're not exploring other options. They're locked in an older model, this kind of functional life skills model, and we have to teach those separately, right? A mindset there versus this other team. Okay, so that could be what's at play as well. So here's the skinny. So do you think IQ is at play here? Do you think there's an intelligence issue between these two? I didn't have the IQ score on one of the kids. Yeah, Rob's his team doesn't really reference that a lot. John's team, they're organizing around that number, very much so. So that may be a force at play here. Well, here's the punchline. John and Rob are actually the same kid. His name is Amro Diab. And what we did was we had the town that he lived in, Amherst, New Hampshire, rebuilt their high school. Bricks and mortar and programmatically, rebuilt it from the ground up. Hired teachers, trained them in a particular model for that school at the time that Amro was positioned to transition from middle school into high school. So he moved from a separate segregated program and was brought back into district. So these are his two teams, year one, year two. Totally different perspectives on who this kid was in the world. You would have sworn you were dealing with a different kid, which is why we present it that way, because it was just so stark. In fact, they're the same kid. That's the kid who was working on bed making skills last year. And everybody predicted from that team that he would not have this kind of social set. She's got a total unibrow right now. I wish you could see her face. She's like, what is going on? A number of things happened when he got brought back into district. One thing that happened was people were like, you don't have a way to communicate. Let's figure that out. So they got with him, and at the time, there was a communication technique that was kind of getting a lot of popular buzz called facilitated communication, where there's physical assistance provided to people while they're moving their hands to point to pictures and symbols and letters. And it ended up being kind of a controversial technique, in part because an adult is holding somebody else's arm while they're typing things out, and like, who's authoring the messages? Well, after about 2 weeks of trying out this method with him, he typed out, you don't need to hold my hand. So they stopped providing the physical assistance. And this is what they got. A kid who, his spelling was close. It was still a little invented spelling thing going on there every now and then. But for the most part, he was communicating. Now, his parents had been reporting that at home, he would communicate in their native language. They came over from Egypt. There's like 1 million languages spoken in Egypt, so I don't remember which one it was. This was a long time ago. But they reported that he was communicating in that language at home. He just wouldn't communicate in school. And of course, nobody on the school team believed it because he had an IQ of 42, and he never gave any evidence that he had those skills until he was in this other setting. So it was a huge shift for everybody involved. And communication was definitely key in figuring out like who Amro is in the world. Now, they engaged him in every aspect of school life. And you can see he's quite charming. Like, the task was to bring the coffee to the far classroom, but there were several stops along the way, because I'm just that kind of a guy. Like, I got it going on, and everybody wants to talk with me, is kind of his entry point into the world. And he could charm pretty much anybody into a conversation. And he was very interested in football, and so we had all worked kind of as a team, and I was more peripheral than central at this time, and got him to be a manager on the football team. He was kind of a glorified water boy, mostly, on that team, but loved hanging out with the guys and being at practice and being in the scene. And he and his teammates desperately wanted to get him onto the field, but he did not like wearing the equipment. He has a lot of sensory sensitivities, and so the coach would not let him come onto the field because that's not safe. You can't go on without a helmet and all the gear, so can't be in the practice that way. Well, his teammates would pass the ball around with him off to the side, and something happened one day where they discovered he actually could kick the ball well, and so they were like, "Come on, coach, just let him kick off for our practices." Coach was like, "He can't go onto the field without a helmet." So they were sneaking around the back of the bleachers and practicing kicking with him when the coach wasn't watching, and he was quite good. And they finally approached the coach again. They're like, "Okay, we've started working out a plan with Amro, and we think we can make this happen." And coach was like, "Okay, show me." They shoved a helmet onto his head with him wincing the whole time. He runs out to the field, he kicks the ball, runs off the field, and tosses the helmet off. The coach is like, "Okay, well that's fine, that's good." Of course, the rest of the adults are like, "Oh my God, that's quasi not legal. You've been doing your own little desensitization program off to the side. This really isn't approved." But we're all like, take a breath. These are high school kids, and they're figuring it out, and he's really fine with it all, so let's just move on. So they were doing this at practice, and he was really getting into it, although he really did not like having the helmet on. And then finally, the teammates were really pressuring the coach. Were like, "We want him on the field for a game." Coach is like, "Okay, we're going to do this." So a game was coming up. The coach called over to the other school, was like, "Look, this guy Amro is going to kick off for our team. He's not going to play the rest of the game. We know we're going to be down a person. We're taking somebody else off the roster to put him in. We're going to take the hit. It's all good. Just wanted you to know." Didn't make it a choice, just announced it to the opposing team. Came back, and in school, word got out that Amro was going to be kicking off for the football team at Friday night's game. Friday night comes, I swear everybody from town was there. Place was jam-packed. Announcer gets on, kicking off for Sauhegan High School, Amro Diab, and you see his teammates shoving his helmet onto his head. He runs out into the field, he kicks off for the team, he runs back to the side, flips off of his helmet, looks up into the stands and goes, big thumbs up. Crowd was roaring. I mean, everybody was just screaming. You could not hear yourself breathe. It was beautiful. He was just that in and with all of his social network in class and on the field now, which was really a big deal. So as you could tell in the video, if you heard that exchange about going to the tie shop, he was picking up his tux for the prom. So I want to close by just showing you him at the prom so that you can kind of see this part of the interaction. Now, his date for the prom over here, she talks in a sing-songy voice. I want you to know that that's not a disability thing. She talks that way to everybody. It's horrible.
Challenges to face. To assure the philosophy of inclusion keeps all students not only in the mainstream, but fully participating and learning what will be important for their own unique futures. To keep the fires of innovation alive without burning out their teachers. To keep the community involved as active partners in the school. And finally, to remember that celebrating diversity is ultimately in everyone's self-interest. We all need to belong in order to become our own personal best.
Okay, the moment we have all been waiting for. The theme of tonight is time of your life. And I think tonight this is a time of his life. Your theme tonight is Amro Diab.
Classic AMRO, right to the last minute there. So that video is available. It's called The Class of 1996, The Class of 96. Put the little title up here. So those segments, and there are lots of other pieces of information in there. That also gives you the understanding that that was 22 years ago that we were doing this work in New Hampshire. And look at your face, you're like, you really? 22 years ago. I'm that old. And Amro's life and many other kids that we were working with at the time really informed our thinking, like, okay, so if we can really do this and make this happen, like, because we were figuring a lot of stuff out as we were going. We were doing the Paula Clutha runaround to try to figure out the supports. So take a moment. What are like 3 things from Morose Story that you think would inform how we design systems, how we design MTSS? Like, what would have to happen from the get-go so that AMRO was just part of a multi-tiered system of instruction in a general ed setting? What would have had to happen from the beginning? What would that system need to look like? Identify 2 or 3 things. So what are 2 or 3 things? Let's do some call-outs so that you can steal each other's good information. Yeah?
You have to remove a lot of walls, fears, and stigma.
Remove walls, fears, and stigma. Great. Love that. What else? Flexibility of staff. Tell me more.
Being willing to change your day-to-day, meet the needs of the students represented at that time of year.
Okay, great. So flexing, kind of expecting to flex in the moment for a particular kiddo. Really big, huge. Thank you, Christy. Yes?
Being able to spend time with that student and figure out their needs and what's going on.
Great, time to get to know a kiddo, right? Get to know their needs, get to know their passions, right? Knowing that he was really into football, very important. Like, of all the social clubs, which one are we going to start with first? Football, because that's where he's already got an in. Great. What else? Yes?
I think there would have to be
Yeah, there's a core belief going on here. And in MTSS, one of our first components that we talk about is having shared beliefs and explicit agreements with those beliefs within your building, right? So most often when we talk about MTSS, we start off talking about, well, it's about prevention. It's about being proactive in your instruction, right? Provide the first best instruction. And we get into database, it's about database decision making, and it's about having decision protocols for when you're going to provide tier 2 or tier 3 supports, and when you're going to change those up. We get very much into those instructional decisions. We get very much into those kind of particular technical aspects of MTSS, and yet those core beliefs, like, do I believe all kids in this neighborhood should go to their neighborhood school, is really the starting point that would open the door for him, because that was not the core belief that was at play before. That's why he was just in this kind of separate channel and had not been given the opportunity to have access to communication supports, have access to lots of really good academic instruction, yeah. Other things that struck you that would inform our design of MTSS? Yes, excellent, right? Provide the opportunity and respect the dignity of risk that comes with that for the kiddo and for you. We're gonna set this up. We're gonna teach to high standards, and we all may fail together on this. And then we'll learn from it, and we'll try again a different way, right? That's huge. It's enormous. We didn't know, we weren't sure about the whole, like, football helmet thing, right? Like, we were all really anxious about that. And at some point, somebody had to be willing to take the leap, right? That football coach really taught us all a thing or two about how it rolls. Another piece that I see in why MTSS would have been helpful to have in place back then would be thinking about academics and behavior together, thinking about all of his needs together as a whole kiddo. And MTSS brings that actively, We're looking at behavior, social, emotional learning, and academics all together when we're looking at data. It's not just figure out what's happening in reading and give a tier 2 reading intervention. Okay, he's struggling with behavior, give him a check-in, check-out program. Well, those two things might actually be related. Right? So let's have common conversations. As I said in a prior session this morning, I really feel like the special sauce in MTSS, aside from beliefs, which I think is central, is the teaming. And it boils down to the adults, like how the adults are coming together to lead the system. And adults can either come together and make it happen, or they can come together and have some other outcome. If the adults aren't getting along, it's not going to be working for the kids. Right? So the special sauce very much so is those adults. A couple other things I'll point to that I think are central. It's having core instruction, universal tier 1 instruction that's based in UDL and based on premises of differentiation, right? Amro had lots of different ways to engage in class. It was fine for him to do a PowerPoint presentation instead of writing a report. That was totally accepted within this school. So having those kinds of options, teachers in this building actually recruited the interests of their classmates. They kept inventories of, okay, if this is my class, what are all the common interests, what are the unique interests, and how can I infuse those interests into what we need to learn within this classroom in this content area. They actively paid attention to engagement. They used a lot of cooperative learning, class-wide peer tutoring, lots of peer-to-peer models were structured into the system in the core of it. So with instruction built that way, figuring out all the individualized supports for Amro kind of really became minimal. Like we had bigger questions that were going on for him, but the day-to-day supports were oftentimes very much built right in with the flexibility of the system in terms of differentiation and UDL. I want to have you watch just the short. How many of you have actually seen the Swift Education Center's MTSS Trilogy videos? There are 3 short videos, Universal, Additional, and Intensified. I know a couple of you have. Okay, so the rest of you don't. So we're going to take 2 minutes and just watch this to hear kind of the core elements of that intensified arena of MTSS be described. And there's some things I want to pull out about what happens all day long, because it's a different way of thinking about supports and services.
MTSS, one system of support for all students. What is intensified support? When a school uses a multi-tiered system of support, or MTSS, all students achieve better academic and behavior outcomes. MTSS efficiently matches measured student needs with evidence-based practices for teaching and learning. Schools rethink how to use their space, personnel, materials, and schedules so that all students can learn together within the core curriculum and with high-quality instruction. Intensified support provides a few students with specially designed instruction, extra support, and other services. This tier is more resource-intensive than the universal and additional tiers and usually involves ongoing daily support. Intensified support is not a substitute for participation in universal support, and like additional support, occurs seamlessly within the natural flow of the classroom and school. Schools identify students' need for intensified support in 3 ways: universal screening, additional support progress monitoring, or an existing individualized support plan. The specially designed interventions take into account individual student needs, which may be a complex combination of needs not easily met by the targeted skill instruction provided in additional support structures. Like additional interventions, the specially designed interventions are evidence or research-based, and student progress is monitored for effectiveness. Although intensified support may be long-term, it may also be short-term and withdrawn when progress monitoring data indicate the student no longer needs it. Progress monitoring data may also indicate the need for a different intense intervention. School and grade level teams that include general and special educators and other specialists or therapists work together to define and deliver intensified support. MTSS intensified support ensures that each and every student is welcomed, valued, and supported in the classroom and school. Learn more about MTSS and SWIFT at www.swiftschools.org.
So some key things in that video that strike me. One, we're talking about the supports happening all day long. So intensified support is not just a box up here, like I get tier 1, then I get tier 2, and then I go someplace for tier 3. We're talking about intensified happening all day long. So if you're truly going to intensify supports, it's looking for every moment in the day all day long. And to me, that's part of the twist and the important shift for kids with significant disabilities. How many of you already currently have kids with significant disabilities fully included in general education settings in your schools? 1. Okay. So how many of you are interested in having a kid with significant disabilities who's in a more separate setting right now move into general ed settings? Okay. So you need a tool that's going to help you with that planning. So let's give you that tool, shall we? There's a short list. It's on your thumb drive. And it's based out of a work that we did that actually learned from AMRO and some other early model programs that we did in the late 90s. We did a program at UNH called the Beyond Access Model. And it focused on looking at students' membership in their general ed classroom, participation in general ed instruction, and learning of the general ed curriculum. And you actually have this checklist on your thumb drive, which lays out some indicators of each of those. The indicators function as a planning tool. So if I'm thinking about a kiddo coming into class, what would I need to get prepared? What would I need to get organized? You have a 2-page cheat sheet that applies for, we worked with quite a wide array of students with a number of different kinds of labels, from kids who had autism, Down syndrome, multiple disabilities, seizure disorders, mitochondrial disorders, pick a label across the spectrum. And we've had amazing success using this planning approach with them. There's a kind of core set of beliefs underneath this checklist. First is this notion that kids might benefit from general instruction. And at least a willingness to play along with that for a period of time by your teaching staff. When we did our early development and evaluation of the model, the teams that we worked with, some of them were like, we'll try it out for a few months. We're not sure that this can happen. Because we were trying to pick kiddos who had the most severe labels for our early work. We're like, if we can get it to work for Cheyenne Gemma in Raymond, New Hampshire, we can get it to work for anybody, because she was in a home-based program, she's medically fragile, she had no communication system, like nobody thought Cheyenne had anything going on. But if we could use it and get Cheyenne included, then maybe there was hope for a lot of other kids too. So the theory is this, that underneath all of these indicators is kids might benefit from good instruction. They might show some learning that we didn't anticipate. The next step is we work on their membership in the classroom. So you start with, what's the learning community? And what are the indicators that would let you know your part, that you count? Like, I belong in this class, I count in this class. So what are the things when kids walk into the classroom, what lets them know that they belong in that classroom?
They have a cubby.
They have a cubby, great. They get greeted. They have a desk.
They come in at the same time as other students.
They come in at the same time as other students. Really nice. Other things that would let somebody know you belong here. People interact with them. Great, you're getting it. So we took that list and formalized it and just tested it and retested it. Like, what are the indicators that came up over and over again? So it was things like having a desk alongside your non-disabled peers versus having a desk in the back of the room. That made a difference. Being greeted, being on the classroom roster, right? If you've got a cubby, it's also alongside your non-disabled peers. Your name is on it. That's your space. It's not your paraprofessional's space. That's your space. Right? That makes a difference. Teacher takes attendance, you get called on. Teacher assigns classroom jobs, you get a classroom job, you are not the classroom job. Right? We worked a second grade team. The teacher was very well-intentioned, and on the list of classroom jobs was this one student's name to be her supporter. I know, look at your eyes, they just popped right out of your head. The intent was, I want peers to interact with her and give her natural supports. Like, I got the intent, but it's like, yeah, when your ship came in, you were at the airport. It's like you knew it was about transportation, but no, this isn't gonna work. So take her off of the job list for the class and let's get her signed up for the various jobs in class. That might be a better role. Transitioning at the same time, really important. When kids leave early and come in late, it's a sign that like they're not accountable, so they're not part of this class, right? Huge things. So you'll see a whole set of indicators on the first page of membership indicators. We look to get those like 75 to 80% in place. Then we move into the next box. You see the arrow here moving inward. Participation. We look to get kids participating in the general ed instruction and the classroom routines, whatever those routines may be. If routines are morning meeting, if routines are saying the Pledge of Allegiance, if the routines are, we report out on some exciting current event that happened last night. Whatever the culture and routines are of that class, that's the list that we make. And then we start problem solving. How could this kid participate as an equal in this instructional routine or social routine? So we have some planning tools that kind of lay out what are all kids doing, what is this kid doing, what would be the supports that are needed, would be one planning approach. Another one is to say, teacher is doing this, students do this in response to show that they're participating. So you're all participating right now by tapping on your computers, because I trust you're not shopping on Amazon, right? You're looking up at me occasionally, like, yeah, I'm still with you, right? You're giving, thank you for the nod over there. You're giving me a little nod, right? You're raising your hands, right? There are lots of different ways that we can show that we're participating in something. What will be the set of indicators that will match for this kiddo that this teacher is going to be able to vibe with to know the kid is participating? I worked with a young guy, Steven, who was kind of a circler. He would circle around the room, and then he would stand in proximity to something. That showed he was attending to the thing. And then he would circle again, and then come back and stand by it again. He was attending to that thing. So sometimes how kids are showing their participation is going to be quite dynamic. We have to figure that out kid by kid. Like with Amro, it was painfully easy. If he gives you a thumbs up, he's with you. If he types a sentence, he's with you, right? Like he's really in your face. That one's going to be easy to problem solve. For other kiddos, it wasn't that obvious or that easiest. So we look to get these participation indicators up and running. So I can participate. Now this is the challenge. This is where people get sticky with it. Isn't that a song, Getting Sticky With It? Oh, that's Getting Jiggy With It. Sorry. I'm like, I think there's a song that goes with that. Getting Sticky With It. Yeah, I think it could be a dance. So the sticky part is that people want to go to the learning box. We're set up, how many of you are special educators? You're in a safe environment, it's okay. So we're trained as special educators. I was trained as a speech pathologist that you identify the present level of performance, the present level of functioning, and then you set your learning objectives. So we start in the learning box. What are you showing me that you know? And then we figure out where and how we're going to support you, and we work out. This model flips that. It says, first, let me bring you into the community. Let me support you to get you engaged in that community. Then I'm going to look at what you're learning from that. It'd be like welcoming all general ed kids to their neighborhood school with a test at the door. And depending on your responses on the test, you get sorted to different classrooms, right? Like, I have to show what I know before I can get into the door. Like, we want to flip that conversation for kids with significant disability labels, which means teachers sometimes are providing instruction not knowing what your current level of performance is. We didn't have great measures on Amro. We didn't have great measures on some other kids. We didn't know what level of functioning they had because they had horrible communication systems. Until we got their communication system up and running, we were all just guessing. So how do you set up instruction if I don't know what you're learning from this? And that's where we gave people the participation indicators to look at. Particularly in the field of autism, participation or engagement or time on task is actually a proxy indicator for a quality educational program, and there's a research base behind that. So this move of ours does have a research base to say, if we're not sure about the learning content part, let's at least get them participating in the instruction. So we actively told teachers, right now, we are not measuring what he's getting out of your lesson content. We right now are measuring, is he engaging with his classmates and with you and with the materials? That's what we're looking for. We got to figure that out. Because if we can get him engaged in instruction, the theory is, if you're engaged in the instruction, you're going to learn from the instruction. But we got to figure out the engagement first. So that's a huge flip, and I'm seeing lots of supportive nods around the room, like you're getting it. Like that, you can imagine that that would be hard for some people. Cheyenne's case, the girl I referenced earlier, I mean, the IQ was below freezing, the performance levels were all below freezing, like everything were really low scores, low numbers across her reports and files. And teachers were like, what is she gonna learn in my second grade class? They're like, we have no idea. We got nothing. But right now she's in a home-based program and her day is about her little music toys and her elephant mover. And there's got to be more in here than those two things in the home program. Fortunately, in Cheyenne's case, her grandmother, who was her guardian, see, Cheyenne was medically fragile. She had a mitochondrial disorder, seizure disorder, cortical visual impairment, motor impairment. She used a wheelchair. She was tube fed. I mean, give me any label, bring it on. She had it. Although her hearing was fine. So sorry, guess one thing. When we got her into school, the grandmother's big goal was just don't kill her. Like, I'd like her to come home alive at the end of the day. So that actually freed up the team, right, to say, really our goal is let's keep her alive today because she'll seize if the temperature changes too much. She'll seize if there's too much visual activity too close to her face. Like, so let's keep her alive. Let's not go into a grand mal seizure today. And then everything else is just a bonus from there. And I've had to do that with several students over time where I've had to actually bring in actual examples of what's happening in the separate place to say, we can do at least this here. Like, I went and observed this girl, Sarah, who was in a hospital-based program. And her visual therapy block, which was a 45-minute block, included her being wheeled into a cardboard box that had a light inside that would turn on and off, with little sparkly streamers hanging in it for visual stimulation. That was a 45-minute block of her day. I'm like, yeah, we can beat that bar. We could do that and so much more back at the neighborhood school. So sometimes it takes going to where the kid is now, doing an honest observation of what you're seeing happening and contrasting it with, could we do that or better here? That's participation. What we saw in our research is that once we set up membership and participation, kids were already showing more learning than was ever expected. Already showing. In our first study, 6 months in, we had 8 kids we were following. And 6 out of the 8 within the first 6 months were showing learning of science, reading, and math that they had never shown prior, just by getting them engaged in it. So sometimes on the IEP legally, we had to rewrite the IEP as a diagnostic IEP to get us all off the hook. Like, our goal right now is to figure out how to support the kid in this setting. So that's the goal of the IEP. It's a diagnostic period. And you actually have that out within your IEP system. Do you all leverage that here? It is legal. Yeah, you can do 30, 60, 90-day diagnostic periods where you're saying, I don't know enough about this kid. Yep. So, let's, time-wise, what are the kinds of kids you have the most questions about? 15 minutes, I want to pick the kids carefully.
The kid, similar to what you were talking about.
So kids with like more motoric, complex, physical,
Yeah,
okay.
a lot of different barriers.
Okay. Okay. Other kids, yeah?
And then after that, loud kids.
Yeah, the loud kids. I need a loud program. It's really true. All right, so let's take a look at Ashley in this short clip, Multiple Access Points, which is from one of our Swift videos.
multiple access points.
When I'm planning for a lesson, I try to give my students multiple access points. This involves different ways of visualizing the material. I know some students learn better by reading, so I make sure that there's an element of reading in there. Some students will learn better if they write it afterwards. Some students need to see it. Some students need to touch it. Sometimes it may feel like a circus, but it's trying to meet the needs of every student in the class.
You will be getting a circle magnet to hold the train or bus onto the Newton scale. This is a new piece of equipment you're going to learn to use. What it does is measure force.
I've worked with Ashley for 2 years now. I taught her in 7th grade science and now in 8th grade science. It was difficult for her to learn how to use the eye gaze machine. Once we started doing that, I started making notebook files so she can look at and switch between the screens. The eye gaze has definitely helped her to become more a part of the class.
I want you to write a question for Ashley. I want you to, okay, I'm gonna give you a marker. We need to try to help her figure out if the new ramp is going to have more or less. So, will the new ramp have more or less effort?
A, more, or B, less?
I'm not sure what the answer is.
She will work with her peers, and she will also be able to go around to different lab stations. So she is capable of learning grade level content as it's relevant.
In Ashley's case, like in Cheyenne's case, there are lots of professionals involved. So part of making it work is managing the adults. You got a PT, you got an OT, you got a speechy. You've got some MDs involved, some pediatricians involved in her case, right? We've got nursing staff because there's some seizure questionings going on. You've got complex communication technology at play, so we had an assistive technology specialist involved. You've got the classroom teachers that are working with her because she's in a middle school setting, so great, we get 4, yay, excellent. School principal, mom and dad, family members that are involved, right? And there was a classroom level para, not attached to her, but definitely involved. So that's 10, and I've not made the full list. Did I say special education teacher? Oh yeah, there was one of those too. Also involved within the design considerations. So the biggest challenge we had in Cheyenne's case, and that I think presented in Ashley's case, was getting all the adults on the same page. Like, here's what we want to try. And the strategy we use within our Beyond Access model is a phase of the work where we say we'd like to try out the following things for 4 to 8 weeks. It is the trick that gets us access to trying things out. When we say, oh, we want to use eye gaze with her, everybody freaks out because they're thinking forever. Right? Oh, we want to have her interact with peers during choice making in science lab, and suddenly everybody's thinking forever and all the things that could go wrong. They're like, well, let's try it out for like 4 to 6 weeks and see how it goes. And if at any point it feels like somebody's getting hurt or it's dangerous or somebody's going to die, we'll stop. Or if we're 2 days into it and we're like, this is just really not working, like nobody's in pain, but it's really not working, then discontinue it. But it's the willingness to try something out versus committing to something forever. Huge difference with the complex kiddos because of all the adults at the table, right? Because you know you're always going to have that 1 or 2 team members who are just not quite on board with what you want to try. So we have to figure out how to kind of give them a pacifier, like distract them quickly, like, we really need you in this other building for the next 4 to 8 weeks, right? Like whatever you need to do to make sure people aren't blocking you from just simply trying something out. So it's just a quick tip on the more complex kiddos like Ashley. Kind of cornerstone understanding around behavior is very much so what's the function of it. And sometimes for kids and for adults, the real turning point behind behavior is having a means for communication. And that is, Helen Keller did not escape the label, the pronouncement of being retarded until she had a means of communication. And the same thing was happening for Brendan. And we find that often when we're so focused on the learning box and we're missing the other things that are happening for kiddos. Our tendency is to just keep lowering the bar, and some kids need us to raise that up. For other kids, the screaming and the loud sounds may be some other function, and so the search is then conduct a real systematic functional behavioral assessment to look for the keys of what is behind the yelling, the screaming, the loud sounds. Is it sensory that's going on? Is it, I want math, or I don't want math? I want this person, or I don't want this person, are all really valued things to look at within the local system. The handouts that you have give you the checklist to start with this, and I've given it to you in long version and in short version. So you have a screening version of the checklist as well, which is like a punchline of 5 questions just to get you started. But then there's the longer list which you can use for planning. There are additional materials that you can just search online. Beyond Access, there are other things that we have that are out there for planning guides. You're welcome to just download them and take them. But this is only as good as the school-wide system of instruction is as well. So we used this in places that weren't implementing school-wide MTSS, that didn't have good behavioral support across the school, didn't have good quality instruction, and it was harder, much harder. So when we think about intensified supports in MTSS, we still want to build that core foundation. This will just help you with your planning process for getting kids who are out into the general ed class. We found the tipping point was getting them into the class more than 50% of the time. Once they were in a given class greater than 50% of that time or 50% of their day, things started to move faster. It was getting to that first 50% that was the hardest. So we really encourage people to try to step in at above 50% of the day when you're starting. I'm sure there's like a gazillion other things we could talk about and cover, but she's giving me the eye. So I want to just quickly point that we've tried to document these lessons in a series of design considerations for MTSS. So we take the 14 essential elements of MTSS, and we went through each of the 14 and kind of raised, if you were thinking about kids with significant disabilities in the system, for this component, what would need to happen? We did that for each of the 14 components. And after we did it for kids with significant disabilities, we went back through the list and we said, well, what about if the kid comes from poverty? What if the kid's black? What if, we just went down the list of all the historical gaps that we have in our system, and the prompts applied to every population. Do we have a screening measure that's valid? Example. That's going to work for English language learners as well, right? So take a look at this. It's on your thumb drive for the materials for this session, and it basically just pulls the lessons that we had for membership, participation, and learning beyond access into our Swift Center's MTSS work. So I hope that you find that that's helpful to you. As you look through any of those materials, feel free to send me questions, email me. It's fine, absolutely fine. If I don't respond in a week, email me again, because sometimes I'm traveling and I miss emails. So just be persistent with me, and I will then be able to get back to you. We are out of time. I'm going to hand it over to her to close out. I thank you for your attention and your engagement and your patience.